Hello everyone, hello. This year is dedicated to Ili Nishmas, Rachalei Abbas, Reb Chaim Tzvi. We are in the middle of Klal Beis and we're discussing the Shita of the Rambam. The Chavetz Chaim quotes the Shita of the Rambam regarding Apei Tlasa in front of three people. That the Rambam has a unique opinion. It's a minority view, but it's a minority view, a legitimate minority view. The Chavetz Chaim quotes, the Yesh Omrim, that if Ruvain speaks Lashon Hara to three people, so once those three people have heard the Lashon Hara, it will eventually spread on its own naturally, that we discussed the last class, and therefore it's basically like it's public knowledge already, and therefore the Rambam says that one of those three who heard the Lashon Hara can mention it further, because it's basically viewed already as if it's public knowledge. That is the Shita of the Rambam. But the Chavetz Chaim starts quoting all of the limitations and the qualifications on this Rambam. We learned a few last week, which we'll review briefly, and then we'll go on to learn more of the limitations, and the Chavetz Chaim is going to conclude that because of all of these qualifications, because of all of these limitations, it's very difficult to rely on this Rambam, halacha l'maisa, because it's just so difficult to fulfill all of the limitations. So the first limitation was the Rambam says it has to be b'derech akroi. Incidentally, not that your intention is to spread it further and to make it worse, but it comes up in conversation. That's limitation number one. Number two, the Chavetz Chaim explains, based on the diuk in the Rambam, it's only mutter for one of those original three to mention it further. But if you hear it from one of those original three, then you're sort of the third generation. The first generation is the one who said it originally. The second generation is those first three, the three listeners. And then if you heard one of those three, then you're not allowed to mention it further. That we discussed last week, a second limitation. A third limitation: if the three listeners are very special, Yirei Elokim, they're very careful with Lashon Hara, or they're not Alei listeners. So then, since they're so careful with Lashon Hara, you can't assume it's going to spread naturally, and therefore the entire Rambam wouldn't apply. Or the Chavetz Chaim says, if it's close friends of the person being spoken about, so again, you can't assume it's going to spread further naturally. That's a third limitation. A fourth limitation: it only applies in that city where those three people normally would talk and discuss things, or in the modern world, in their circle of friends, their email list or whatever. It only applies; it's limited to that group. But if it's beyond that group, so then it doesn't apply, because there's no reason to think it will spread beyond that group. Those are the four limitations we saw until now, and now the Chavetz Chaim adds on three more. Okay. We're up to Klal Beis, Siv Zayin. Okay. This is limitation number 5, if you're keeping a score at home. Siv Zayin. Ima Omer, he's here Shalolo Galoso. If the one speaking, the original speaker, told the listeners, don't tell anyone. I want to keep it a secret. Afilu Amar Bifnei Rabim, Yesh Lo Mishum Lashon Hara. Lumishi Yigal Achar Kach, Afilu B'Mikra. If the original speaker, Ruvain, told the three listeners, 1, 2, and 3, don't tell anyone, so then he's going out of his way that this should not become public knowledge. So then it's less likely they'll mention it further, because people, first of all, it's usher, we'll see, it's usher to spread a secret, and it's usher, and B, they're less likely to do it also. So therefore, the entire heter doesn't apply if the original speaker tells the three listeners, don't tell anyone else. Ve'afilu, and even, this is an interesting chiddush, the Chavetz Chaim goes on. Imhu roeh, if you're one of the three listeners, if you hear, let's say you're number 1, if you see she'echad me'ashomim o shnayim lo shamu es hara hazu v'gilu la'acherim, if listener number 1 sees that listeners number 2 and 3 didn't listen to the original one, and they mentioned it further. So you're listener number 1. You heard the Lashon Hara from Reuven with 2 other people. He said, don't mention to anyone. The other 2 didn't listen. By the way, that happens, unfortunately. And if you want to keep a secret and you tell 3 people, it normally doesn't work. So if you want to keep something a secret, I don't think it's a good idea to tell 3 people. But anyway, that's what this guy did. So you saw that numbers 2 and 3 mention it further. It's still usher for you to mention it further. You're the first guy. You can't mention it further because the heter of Beit Chasa means when all three are, feel free to mention it further. But since you were told not to, so the original heter doesn't begin. Again, Ruvain told the three people, don't mention it further. So from the very beginning, the original heter didn't exist, didn't begin. And that's what the Chafetz Chaim says, that in that case, the entire heter of the Rambam doesn't apply. The Chafetz Chaim explains here in the footnote Tesvav,